Hey there everybody and welcome back. For those of you that are interested in learning how to build your own tip calculator or something similar but you don't want to learn how to do coding and you want to find a way to do this for free, stay tuned. I'm covering the basics in today's video and this will work for mobile or web apps. So before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe and check out the channel for new content. Now, jumping straight in, I am going to put a link in the description to a more entry-level video of this AppGyver platform. I'm using the community edition, which as of filming this video is free, but general idea is you'll be able to use the platform, a very simple drag and drop style interface. I've had other similar tutorials online, so you can check out the Codeless Fix website if you're interested. You can go through all of these different links and kind of learn more, but I do have an AppGyver tutorials section with tons of different links where you can learn new things. So what we're going to be doing today is just make a simple tip calculator. So I'll brief you on what I've done so far. First and foremost, I'll start with the variables. We don't need any app variables today, but you can go to page variables, and these are the ones that I have so far. Now, you do have two choices. First, if you want to have actual number buttons, like 1 through 9 and then the number 0, you can have a bunch of different variables. Variable 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The problem with that is you're going to have to start adding the numbers to each other and figure out, okay, if a user presses 1 twice, how do I make that 11 instead of 2? I know that may sound like it doesn't make sense, but once you actually try to start building it, that will make more sense. Another thing is, I don't love a lot of tip calculators that force you to use 10, 12, 15, 18%. They don't give you a lot of freedom or flexibility. So what we're going to use instead is we're going to have a page variable for bill, a page variable for tip, a page variable for tip percent, and a page variable for total. Then basically the idea is, okay, we're going to take the bill, multiply it by the tip percent, and get the total. And the reason we're storing the tip here is we want the user to be able to see each of the actual numbers, the tip, the bill, and then the total. So instead of just saying your tip is 15%, show them the amount. So what we're going to do is I've dragged over these options. So now let's build out the UI together. First is the title. When you click it, I just put in tip calculator. And then if you go over to layout, I have it centered here. These three are text. So the first one, I'll show you the formula. It is in quotes, tip space plus, and then the page variable tip. You can go to page variables here if you want to see your page variables, and you can double click whichever one to enter it in, or you can type it out like it is here. The next one is the bill, and then the next one is the total. Now, what we're going to do is we have three options down here. So first up, we have the tip percentage, and this is an input field. Then I have another input field and a drop-down menu. So we're going to work through this together. First up, for tip percentage, we'll click Value, Data and Variables, Page Variable, and you'll see we have tip percent. The main reason for this is I want the user to be able to specify whatever that percentage is. Then we have our label here. So what we're going to do is allow the user the ability to select or type in the bill amount. So we're going to go to Data and Variables, Page Variable, Bill. And basically our formula is multiply this by this, and you get the tip. Then add them together and you get the total, and then display the bill here. So we're going to save, and then we're going to go down to the drop down. You do not need this. I'm using this to show a alternative method. So I'm going to put a divider here so that you can kind of ignore it, but this is going to be a way to get some preset options. So the selected value for this is going to be the tip percent. And the reason I'm doing this is if you decide you want to have preset values, then you're more than welcome to. So the value here could be 15%, or we could start with 10%, and then the value is going to be 0.1, or in this case, we'll assume that the user's typing in 10. But to make it easier, we're just going to do 0.10. Then we're going to have 15%, and so you'll see we'll put 15%, and then we can hit 0.15, and then we will have 20%, which the value will be 0.20. Now we can click Save. So when a value is selected, then that value down here, this is the label, so the value will be the percentage amount. Now we can click Save. And now you'll see that the total value is the page variable for total. So what we can do is we can then change everything. So the page layout, for example, here is going to help us to set some background logic. So what you'll see we can do in theory is you can either have a calculate button or set up logic here to automatically refresh. I like to have a calculate button, so we're going to go ahead and put one in here and put calculate. Now when this button is pressed, what we're going to do is we're going to set a page variable. So you can drag this over. And then the page variable is going to be, let's first set the tip amount to make sure that our math is working correctly. So we're going to put a formula. And then because our variables are text, what we'll try to do first is basically just multiply the two. So what we can do is if you ever have any questions about how the math operators work, you can click the math button and then you'll see down here we have tons of different options. So we have the divide option. You can continue to scroll through and see there's a multiply option. So we'll double click this and it sets it up for us. So what we'll do first is we'll go up to the top and we'll find our page variables and we'll multiply our bill and then we'll multiply it by our tip percent. Now in this case you'll see that it's showing as red. So when you click this, typically you'll be able to see really just why this value is not showing as correct or why this formula is not correct. You'll see text type is not assignable to number. So what we can do is type in number, and then we can type in number, and we're putting the double quotes around it. And what this is doing is assigning it as a number. And then, I know that may sound obvious, but the idea is number type is not assignable to text type. Let's test it this way just to see if it works. All right, so now that we are in the preview portal, we have a tip percentage here and a label here, which we can label in a little bit, but let's just try typing in a 10% tip, and let's do it on $10, and we're gonna hit calculate. So you'll see it is now 100. Obviously, we did not set the tip correctly, but if we put a decimal here, you'll see that it is correctly calculating. Our bill is 10, our tip is 1. So now we would just need to update the total and then figure out, do we want to force the user to have a decimal here or not? So let's go ahead and work through this logic. So when we click the calculate button, we're going to calculate everything here so we can basically copy this formula. But here we would want to put bill just to make sure. So what I like to do, Control C, Control V, and we can copy that function. And what we'll do is this value is we've set the tip. Now we need to set the total. So what we can do is you can either connect it here and do all of the math, or if you want, you can click it here because now we have the tip. And what you can do is instead of multiply, you can add. And what we're going to do is add the page variable for bill to the page variable for tip. And then that's all that there is to it. So we will click save, and now let's test this out. Going back over here, we have our tip percentage is 1, our bill is 10. You'll see the drop-down value changes, and you'll see now we have a bit of an issue, but that's because we did not add the decimal. So we'll add in the decimal and recalculate. You'll see tip is 1 because that's 10% of 1, or of 10. So 10% of 10 is 1. Adding it up is 11. Now let's try to change it up a little bit. Let's do 11% of 100. And you'll see now these values are updating. But what we're wanting to do, because this value is this value directly, it's not tied to the button click. So that will always be that way, which is kind of expected. So the idea here is if we were to update this, you'll see 11% of 100 is 11, and then it's adding back in to be 111. So it's working as expected. Now, the reason that things are set up down here is you'll see if I change the tip percentage to 0.15, the drop down changes, but if I change it to 0.16, it doesn't. And that's because these values are pre-selected. So I know this may be a little confusing, and the reason why I set things up the way that I did is if you want to choose to allow the user to type in their percentage here, you can. The alternative is to allow the user to preset options here and then calculate and do it that way. So you can allow them to do either option. It is entirely up to you. Now, if you're wanting to figure out how to get in, kind of work this a little bit further. So again, this option would be ideal for most people. Just have drop downs for the different percentages, which is totally fine. And this is cleaner. You don't need to have any decimals, which can be confusing to some people who may not be as good at math. Or you can try to find out, okay, what's the best way when we're doing this formula here, for example? How could we set this up to have this tip percent to have a decimal in front of it? Because if you have things set up this way, it could be a little bit confusing. And the reason for that is we can't just add in a decimal here. It won't work like that. So we have a couple of options. So you can go through your math options and try to figure out how to assign everything the way that you want. But an alternative is we have this option as this number multiplied by this number. So we can mess around with everything after the comma to create a new number. So what we could do, one option would be to multiply in here. So we could do this multiply option. And then we have number 1. So let's put in number 2, which would be something like we could put 0.100 or 10 or whatever the case may be. So you'll see that it's an unexpected decimal point. So one option would be to set up a custom value for this, or you can go through your math values and try to figure out, okay, what options do we have? Maybe instead we want to divide by 100. That might be an easier choice. So what we can do is we could swap it out for divide, put this number, and then divide by 100. So we could test this one out, but you just have to make sure that you're closing off all of your parentheses properly. So let's test this and use the actual numbers instead. So we'll click save. And then in our tip percentage, we'll put 10. And then we'll put 100 here. And then click calculate, and you'll see 10, 100, 110. Now, just for good measure, you'll see when we hit 11, nothing happens. But when we put 15, it's not changing down here, which is not the best sign. But it could also be because there are more complex things running in the background. So also, it's calculating when we hit the calculate button. So you'll see that it's adding up correctly. 15% of 100 is 15, adding it back. And users don't have to type in the decimal, but the options down here will still work. And you'll see it calculates it or displays it here. And when we click calculate, it puts everything here. Downside is now it's using this as a decimal. So this is where you have to pick and choose. If you don't want users to see the decimal value, then you would need to set things up the way that we have here. So this is your chance to pick or choose. If you have the calculate button set, then what you would want to do in your drop-down labels at this point is to remove all of these decimals, because that's how the calculation is being run. I know this may seem confusing. The idea is, do you want users to need to see the decimals or not? So what we can do is we could choose 10% here and make the bill 100, and you'll see it's working as expected. Now if we make the tip 15, everything's updating and it's working as expected. So, long story short, you have several options. You can allow the users to type things in. I think this method is a little bit cleaner because it allows the user to type in the number and then it automatically converts it to a decimal and then provides the tip percentage, the bill, and the total. There are little changes that you can make to make this a little bit more attractive. For example, we have this here. We could put space plus, and in quotes, we could add in a percentage symbol. When we do this, you'll see that as the percentage is added in, if we type in 15, If we click calculate, nothing's going to happen, but you'll see that it puts the text in here. So if we put in a bill of 100, now you'll see that we have a percentage, a bill, and a total, and you can add in dollar signs as well. I know this was a little bit lengthy as this is not one of the more complex videos, but I just want to show you, again, you can have drop-down options, you can get creative and allow users to type things in. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions or want to learn about the actual publishing process, I'll put some helpful links in the comment box or in the description below. But again, you can check out AppGyver tutorials over at codelessfix.com. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment box below, and I'll see you all in the next video.